They called it a wedding, but everyone at the dusty trading post knew it was really a funeral for my dignity. They'd tied a dirty ribbon in my hair, a cruel joke against its fiery red color. The rough linen dress my aunt sewed for me scratched at my skin, a constant reminder of this nightmare. I stood there stiff as a corpse, while the man they called my groom, Jed Tillman, threw his head back and laughed with his grimy friends. "She ain't much to look at," he howled, his words sloshing with cheap whiskey. "But she'll keep the cabin warm." The other men roared, their laughter like stones pelting my skin. It was as if I wasn't even there, as if I was a ghost they could mock for sport. My cheeks burned with a fire that had nothing to do with the blistering sun. My hands clenched the bouquet of wildflowers someone had yanked from the dirt, already wilting in my grip. Weeds, just like me. There was no preacher. There were no vows. There was no shred of respect. It was just a performance, a sick piece of theater to kill time before the saloon opened its doors again. This was my life now. A punchline. When the wagon lurched forward, Jed didn't offer me a hand up. He didn't even look at me. He just slapped the wagon's dusty flank, his voice dripping with contempt. "You can walk if you want to come, Mrs. Tillman." The name felt like acid on my soul. I risked one last glance at my aunt, the only family I had left. She turned her face away, her shoulders slumped in shame or indifference, I couldn't tell which. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't a joke. I wasn't a ghost. And I wasn't Mrs. Tillman. I stepped off the dusty path, away from the wagon, and plunged into the sharp, unforgiving brush of the wilderness. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. The laughter faded behind me, swallowed by the groaning of the wagon wheels and the lonely whisper of the wind. I walked. My flimsy shoes tore on sharp rocks and cactus roots. My throat went raw and dry, not from thirst, but from holding back a scream of pure rage. I kept walking because stopping meant admitting they had finally broken me. And I had been broken once before. When my mother died, and my father drank away our farm piece by piece until there was nothing left but dust and regret. He'd sold me too, in a way. This wedding was the final payment on his debt. But this time would be different. This time I wouldn't break. I would burn. I walked until the sun bled amber and crimson across the endless sky, until my legs finally betrayed me, and I collapsed near a shallow, muddy creek. My body was screaming, but my mind was eerily calm. I had escaped. That was all that mattered. Then I heard it. The soft, slow thud of a single horse. No wagon, no shouting. Just one rider, moving with a quiet purpose that sent a fresh jolt of terror through my exhausted body. My heart hammered against my ribs. I curled into a ball, trying to disappear into the landscape. If they had sent someone from the wagon to drag me back, to finish their cruel joke, I wouldn't go quietly. I would fight. I would scratch and bite and scream until my last breath. But the man who dismounted was not one of them. He wasn't from the trading post. He wore a worn deerskin coat, intricately beaded along the shoulders. He moved with a grace that was almost supernatural, like he was a part of the silence, not an intruder in it. His face was sharp, carved by the wind and sun, and a long, thin scar ran down one cheek like a bolt of lightning had marked him. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't shout my name. He simply stepped forward, knelt by the creek, and poured water from a skin pouch into his cupped hand. Then he held it out to me. His eyes. They didn't look at me like I was a joke. They didn't look at me like I was property. They looked at me like I was real, like I was a person. "Drink," he said, his voice soft, yet carrying a strength that resonated deep in my bones. I stared at his outstretched hand, at the life-giving water trembling in his palm. And for the first time all day, maybe for the first time in years, someone waited for me. They weren't demanding, or taking, or mocking. They were offering. But trust was a currency I no longer carried. I'd seen what men could do with smiles and soft words. I'd learned the hard way that kindness was often just a mask for cruelty. Still, something in this man's quiet stillness felt different. It disarmed me more than any threat could. Slowly, cautiously, I crawled forward and drank from his hand. I kept my eyes locked on his, trying to read the unreadable, searching for the trick, the angle, the lie. There was none. When I finished, he didn't demand thanks. He just stood, walked back to his horse, and returned with a heavy wool blanket. He draped it over my shivering shoulders. The warmth was immediate, seeping into my chilled bones. But it was more than just the wool. It was the intention behind it, an act of pure, unadorned kindness. "You're not one of them," I whispered, my voice a broken croak. He didn't answer. Instead, he untied another small pouch from his saddle and tossed me a piece of dry, dense flatbread. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. He built a tiny, smokeless fire with the practiced ease of someone who lived his life in the wild. He used a piece of flint and a bit of dry moss, and in moments, a small flame danced between us. I watched him, my mind struggling to catch up. Why would he help me? A woman with nothing, no family, no money, no name worth speaking. I was a runaway bride from a sham wedding, a piece of human trash thrown away by her own people. To him, I should have been invisible, or worse, a burden. When the bread was gone and some strength had returned to my limbs, he offered me his hand. Not to pull me, not to lead me, just to help me stand. It was a gesture of support, not control. "What is your name?" he asked finally, his voice calm and even. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Clara Bishop." He gave a single sharp nod. "I am Tohani." I repeated his name softly, tasting the strange, beautiful syllables on my tongue. Tohani. It felt important, like a name I would need to remember for the rest of my life. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did you stop for me? You don't know me." For the first time, the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. "You looked like you had been forgotten," he said. "I know what that feels like." And that's when I realized the ground beneath me had shifted. I had run from one world and stumbled headfirst into another. We rode through the deepening dusk, a comfortable silence stretching between us. It wasn't an awkward silence that needed to be filled with nervous chatter. It was a shared silence, full of unspoken understanding. Above us, the stars began to pop out of the velvety black canvas, sharp and brilliant, like a million watchful eyes. The landscape changed as we rode. The dry, scrubby plains gave way to rolling hills, and then to towering pines and massive, winding rock formations that looked like sleeping giants. The air grew cooler, cleaner. At the edge of a deep canyon ridge, Tohani pulled his horse to a stop. He pointed down into the darkness below. Nestled between the protective arms of the canyon walls, lit by the flickering glow of dozens of small campfires, was a village. Smoke curled lazily into the night air. The faint sound of voices and the distant bark of a dog drifted up to us. It was an Apache village. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I gripped the saddle horn, my knuckles turning white. I'd heard stories about the Apache. Vicious, savage, killers of settlers. Jed and his friends used to tell gruesome tales around the fire, tales of torture and death. Tohani must have sensed my fear. He turned to me, his dark eyes seeming to pierce right through the wall I had built around myself. "I will take you there only if you choose to go," he said, his voice steady. I stared at him, bewildered. "And if I don't?" His gaze didn't waver. "Then I take you no farther. This is where my path ends. You can walk where you wish from here. But I will tell you this, Clara Bishop. Down there, among my people, no one will mock you." My breath hitched in my chest. A choice. He was giving me a choice. The last time someone had offered me a choice, I was a little girl, too young to understand what saying no even meant. My father had asked if I wanted to go stay with my aunt for a while. I'd said yes, thinking it was a vacation. I never saw him again. This time was different. I was no longer a child. I was a woman forged in humiliation and tempered by desperation. I slid off the horse, my feet landing solidly on the rocky ground. I folded the warm wool blanket he had given me and handed it back to him. I looked down at the flickering lights of the village, then back at his scarred, stoic face. "Lead the way," I whispered. Behind me, the ghost of a broken girl in a tattered linen dress faded into the darkness. Ahead of me lay something I couldn't yet understand. But for the first time in a very long time, it felt a lot like being seen. But Tohani had left one crucial detail out. As we descended the narrow, winding path into the canyon, he finally spoke again, his voice low and grim. "You must be silent. You must not look anyone in the eye unless they speak to you first. My people are on edge. The soldiers from the fort have been pushing closer to our lands. They see any outsider as a threat." He paused, his words hanging heavy in the cool night air. "Your arrival tonight, it could be seen as a provocation. It could be a death sentence, for you or for us." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a sanctuary, it was a tinderbox. And I was the spark. When we stepped into the light of the campfires, every head turned. A wave of silence washed over the village, so sudden and complete it was like a physical blow. The quiet chatter, the children's laughter, the rhythm of work, it all just stopped. They didn't look at me with judgment or sneering contempt like the men at the trading post. This was something else entirely. It was a cold, hard assessment. The women, their faces etched with a dignity born from hardship, looked at me with guarded curiosity. The children, who had been playing moments before, peeked out from behind hide tents, their eyes wide and silent. And the men, warriors with scarred arms and postures as rigid as the canyon walls, watched me not as a person, but as a problem, a puzzle to be solved, or a threat to be eliminated. Tohani said nothing. He simply walked toward a central fire pit, and I had no choice but to follow in his footsteps, feeling 100 pairs of eyes burning into my back. He gestured for me to sit on a log a short distance from the fire. I obeyed without a word. Then, he walked away. He approached an old woman sitting near the largest fire. Her long, gray hair was braided with brilliant blue turquoise stones that caught the firelight. She was clearly an elder, a person of great importance. Tohani spoke to her in their native tongue, his voice too low for me to hear. He gestured once in my direction. The elder listened, her face an unreadable mask of wrinkled leather. Finally, she gave a single, sharp nod. She rose with a slow, deliberate grace and walked toward me. She stopped a few feet away, her dark eyes boring into me. They held the wisdom of 1,000 seasons and the sorrow of 1,000 losses. "You are not one of us," she said, her voice raspy but clear. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "But he brought you here." I stiffened, my throat suddenly tight. "I didn't ask him to." "Tohani does not bring strays to our fire," she said, her words sharp as flint. "He does not bring those who do not belong." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over me. "So the question is not why he brought you. The question is what you bring with you. Trouble follows your kind like a shadow." Before I could answer, before I could defend myself, she turned and walked away. A moment later, a young girl appeared at my side and placed a small clay bowl of savory-smelling stew in front of me. Then she, too, vanished back into the shadows. No more words, no ceremony, just a bowl of food and a wall of silent suspicion. I ate the stew, my hands trembling. Every few moments, I would catch someone staring. Not with open hostility, but with a careful, unnerving watchfulness. They weren't waiting for me to fail. They were waiting for the trouble I carried to reveal itself. When Tohani finally returned, he didn't sit beside me. He stood on the opposite side of the fire, his tall frame silhouetted against the flames. "They know you were hurt," he said. "How?" I asked, confused. "I didn't say anything." "You did not have to. Pain has no strangers here. They see it in the way you hold yourself. But they also see the clothes you wear. The dust of the white man's road is on you." He let that sink in. "They want to know why you ran." I looked down at my hands. "I ran from a life that wasn't a life." "That is not enough," he said, his voice firm. "They need to know you are not a scout, or a spy, or a thief running from the law." A cold dread washed over me. I had run from one prison only to find myself in another, more dangerous one. Here, my life hung by the thread of their suspicion. That night, a young girl, maybe 10 years old, approached my lonely spot by the dying embers. She didn't speak. She simply placed a thick wool wrap beside me and a small, polished stone with strange symbols carved into it. Then she ran off into the darkness before I could even thank her. I clutched the stone. It was smooth and cool in my palm. I lay down, pulling the wrap over me, staring up at the vast, indifferent stars. No one had asked me to explain myself. No one had blamed me. They had simply watched me, waiting. And in that heavy, watchful silence, I found something I hadn't expected. Not peace, not safety, but a profound and terrifying loneliness. I was an island, and the sea around me was deep, dark, and full of doubt. One wrong move, and I would drown. The morning chill woke me before the sun had even crested the canyon rim. The village was already stirring with a quiet, purposeful energy. Women moved like ghosts between the hide tents, carrying baskets and water skins. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. I sat up, my body aching, my mind a tangle of fear and uncertainty. Was I supposed to stay here by the dead fire? Was I a guest or a prisoner? Every instinct screamed at me to stay small, to stay invisible, to not give them any more reasons to distrust me. But then I saw him. Across the camp, Tohani was splitting kindling with a heavy stone axe. His movements were fluid and powerful, each strike landing with perfect precision. And without thinking, without weighing the consequences, I stood up. I crossed the open ground of the camp, feeling those ever-present eyes on me. I stopped right in front of him. "Let me help," I said. He looked up, his expression unreadable. His gaze flickered down to my hands, soft and pale, then back to my face. A flicker of something, doubt, amusement, crossed his features. "I've split wood before," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Just never for people who looked at me like I might actually matter." The corner of his mouth twitched again. He didn't smile, but he gave a slight nod of what might have been approval. He picked up a smaller, lighter axe and handed it to me. He didn't give me the easy logs. He gestured to a pile of gnarled, stubborn oak. A test. The log resisted. My first swing bounced off with a dull thud. My arms, weak from hunger and exhaustion, trembled. The second strike bit into the wood, but barely. By the third, my palms were raw and stinging. A blister was already forming. But I kept going. I poured every ounce of my frustration, my fear, my rage into each swing. The sting in my hands was nothing compared to the sting of humiliation I had endured. And I noticed something. A few of the women had stopped their morning tasks. They were watching me, not to judge, not to mock, but to observe. Finally, one of them, a woman with a hard face and knowing eyes, stepped forward. She said nothing. She simply held out a pair of worn leather wraps. I paused, breathless, and took them from her, my eyes conveying the thanks my lungs couldn't spare. No one offered pity. No one offered help. They just offered me the tools I needed, the space to struggle, and the right to prove myself. Tohani worked beside me, his pile of split wood growing twice as fast as mine. But he didn't rush. He matched his rhythm to mine. a silent partner in my struggle. It was a language without words, a shared understanding forged in sweat and effort. Later that morning, as I was stacking the last of my pitifully small pile of wood, the elder with the turquoise in her hair returned. She stood over me, her shadow falling across my work. "Tohani says you do not complain," she stated, her voice flat. I paused, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. "What would it change if I did?" "Nothing," she admitted. "But it means you are not here to be rescued." I straightened up, my back screaming in protest, and looked her directly in the eye, forgetting Tohani's earlier warning. "I don't want to be rescued," I said, my voice low and fierce. "I want a place where my worth isn't a punchline." The elder studied my face for a long, silent moment. Her gaze was so intense it felt like she was peeling back the layers of my soul. Then, to my utter shock, she reached out a wrinkled hand and gently touched my chin. "We have no need for ghosts here," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "But we always find room for a woman who wakes before the fire is lit." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with the weight of her words. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it was a crack in the wall of their suspicion, a tiny sliver of light in the darkness. But as I stood there, catching my breath, another woman approached. She was younger than the elder, with eyes as sharp and black as obsidian chips. Her face was a mask of undisguised contempt. This was the woman who had given me the leather wraps. She stopped in front of me, crossing her arms over her chest. She spat on the ground, inches from my feet. "You smell like the men who burned my home," she hissed, her voice dripping with a venom that chilled me to the bone. "Working with us does not make you one of us. It just makes you a clever stray, a dog that knows how to beg for scraps." And with that, she turned and stalked away, leaving me reeling as if she had physically struck me. The small victory I had felt moments before vanished, replaced by a cold, hard knot of fear. I hadn't just stumbled into a suspicious village. I had stumbled into a place of deep, raw wounds, and my face, my skin, my very existence was a reminder of the people who had inflicted them. The woman's name was Nolan. I learned that later from a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. I learned that her husband and 2 sons had been killed by cavalry scouts 3 winters ago. They hadn't just killed them. They had made a sport of it. Since that day, her heart had been a stone. Her hatred for me wasn't just suspicion, it was personal. It was a living, breathing thing, and it poisoned the air around me. For the next few days, I lived on a knife's edge. I worked from sunup to sundown. I hauled water from the creek, my muscles screaming in protest. I helped grind corn with a heavy stone pestle until my shoulders ached. I did every menial, back-breaking task I could find, trying to prove I wasn't a clever stray. Some of the villagers softened. The children, in their innocence, began to accept my presence. One afternoon, a little boy with tangled hair and feet as quick as a roadrunner challenged me to a race to the far edge of the canyon. The whole village was gathered, watching the young men practice their archery. It was a public spectacle. My first instinct was to refuse, to shrink back into the shadows. But the boy's grin was too infectious, his challenge too pure. "Come on, outsider," he teased. "I bet you can't even run like a squirrel." The words were playful, not cruel like Jed's had been. And so, I ran. I kicked off my ruined shoes and ran barefoot, my red hair flying behind me like a banner. The hard-packed earth was cool beneath my feet. I didn't think about Jed. I didn't think about the mocking laughter or the sting of humiliation. I just ran. I ran with the wild, desperate freedom of a caged animal set loose. I lost, of course. The boy flew across the ground like he had wings, but when I crossed the finish line, breathless and laughing, I threw my arms up in the air like a champion, and the village responded. The children burst into cheers. Some of the women, who had only ever given me guarded glances, smiled. actually smiled. Even some of the stoic warriors, watching from the ridge, gave slight, almost imperceptible nods of approval. I saw Tohani standing in the shade of a tall pine, his arms crossed, his face as unreadable as ever. But his eyes followed me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. It was the look of a man who had placed a secret wager on my spirit and was watching me win against the odds. It was a small victory, a brief moment of sunshine. But Nolan was there too. She stood apart from the others, her face a thundercloud. She didn't see a woman finding her feet. She saw an enemy celebrating on the graves of her family. As the crowd began to disperse, she walked past me, her shoulder intentionally bumping mine. "A fast dog is still a dog," she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. The warmth of the moment vanished, leaving me cold and exposed. That night, music drifted through the camp. Flutes carved from bone, the steady heartbeat of a hide drum. It was a mournful, beautiful sound that seemed to pull at something deep inside me. A young girl, the same one who had given me the carved stone, took my hand and tried to pull me into a simple, circling dance. I stumbled, my feet clumsy, my body rigid with self-consciousness. Nolan was watching. I could feel her glare burning into me. My brief laughter from the race died in my throat. I pulled my hand away from the little girl and retreated back to my lonely spot by the fire, the music now sounding like a lament for all I had lost. Later, after the fires had burned down to glowing embers, Tohani came and sat beside me. The silence stretched between us. "You ran well," he said finally. "It didn't matter," I whispered, staring into the dying flames. "She still hates me." "Nolan hates the memory you carry in your skin," he corrected gently. "She sees the ghost of her husband's killers in your face." He paused. "It is a heavy burden for you to bear. It is not fair, but this land is not fair." "Then what am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice cracking. "How can I fight a ghost?" "You cannot," he said simply. "You can only prove that you are not one." He looked at me then, his gaze direct and serious. "But her hatred is not the only danger here, Clara. There is another." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. "What do you mean?" "The men from the trading post," he said, his voice dropping low. "The one they call Jed. A man like that does not let go of what he believes is his. His pride is a vicious animal. He will come looking for you." Before I could process his words, a shout echoed from the lookout post on the canyon rim. It was a sharp, urgent cry of warning. In an instant, the peaceful camp transformed. Warriors materialized from the shadows, bows in hand. The quiet murmur of the village was replaced by a tense, waiting silence. Tohani stood up, placing himself between me and the path leading into the village. "Stay here," he commanded. "Do not move." A lone rider was descending the path, but as he came closer, my heart stopped. It wasn't just a messenger. The man rode with a swaggering arrogance, his coat too clean, his boots too new for this rugged land. It was Jed's older brother, Marcus, a man twice as cruel and 10 times as smart as Jed. And he had a reputation for getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. He rode his horse directly into the center of the camp, showing a blatant disrespect that was a clear provocation. He scanned the faces of the silent warriors with a cold, dismissive sneer. Then his eyes found me. "Well, well," he said, his voice loud and mocking. "Look what the savages dragged in." He didn't just want me back. He wanted to make a point. He was lighting a match right next to the tinderbox, and I was standing in the middle of it. Marcus Tillman let his cold eyes drift from me to Tohani, who stood like a stone wall between us. "I'm looking for a runaway," Marcus announced to the silent village, though his gaze was fixed on me. "A girl named Clara Bishop. She belongs to my brother by contract." Contract. The word hit me like a physical blow. My father hadn't just sold me for whiskey. He had signed a piece of paper. I was property. I'm not a runaway, I said, my voice shaking but clear. I stepped out from behind Tahani, refusing to hide. I walked away from a life of mockery. Marcus's lips twisted into a cruel smile. My brother was embarrassed, in front of a dozen men. He has a reputation to uphold. He wants you back, and he's willing to pay for the trouble of your return. He looked around at the grim-faced warriors. $100. For the girl. The insult was staggering. He was trying to buy me from them like a stolen horse. She does not belong to him, Tahani said, his voice dangerously calm. And she is not for sale. She sure as hell don't belong here, Marcus sneered, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Look at her, a white woman with hair like fire. She's an omen, a bad one. She'll bring nothing but trouble down on you people. This is Apache land, Tahani replied, his hand moving almost imperceptibly closer to the knife at his belt. And she is under our protection now. Protection? Marcus laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You think hiding behind these primitives makes you a woman worth protecting? Girl, you have no idea the trouble you're in. He turned his attention back to Tahani. This isn't just about the girl. There's a debt, a contract signed by her father. That contract gives my family rights to his land, and everything on it. My blood ran cold. The farm. He was talking about my family's farm, but it was worthless. Dry, dusty, and barren. Ride back, Tahani said, his voice like the rumble of distant thunder. Tell your brother she chose her own path, and we chose to honor that. You'll regret this, Marcus snarled, his hand dropping to the pistol holstered at his hip. All of you. Only cowards regret protecting the brave, Tahani said, his eyes locking with Marcus's. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought Marcus would draw his gun. The air was thick with unspoken violence. The warriors tensed, arrows ready on their bowstrings. But something in Tahani's unblinking stare, something in the unified, silent readiness of the entire village, made him reconsider. He was one man against 50. With a final, venomous glare, he wrenched his horse's reins, turned, and galloped back up the path, disappearing into the darkness. The immediate threat was gone, but a new, more dangerous one had taken its place. The village was no longer just suspicious of me. Now, I was the declared source of a conflict with the outside world. I had put every single one of them in danger. The camp did not return to its quiet rhythm. It buzzed with hushed, urgent conversations. I saw people casting glances at me, then at Tahani, then at the elder. I was a disease, and they were debating the cure. Nolan's face was a mask of grim satisfaction. I told you, she said to the woman beside her, her voice carrying across the camp. She is a curse. That night, the elder woman summoned me to her fire. This time, it wasn't a test. It was an interrogation. Tahani stood nearby, his face grim. He spoke of a contract, the elder said, her eyes pinning me to the spot. A debt. What debt does he speak of, Clara Bishop? My mind was racing. The farm was worthless. Why would the Tillmans be so obsessed with it? It didn't make any sense. My father, he owed them money, I stammered. He signed the farm over to them before he died. And that is all? The elder pressed. Yes, it's just a worthless patch of dirt, I cried, desperation creeping into my voice. The elder's eyes narrowed. Men like that do not start wars over worthless dirt. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on the simple silver locket I wore around my neck. It was my mother's, the only thing of value I had left in the world. What is that? It's my mother's, I said, my hand instinctively flying to my throat to protect it. Let me see it, she commanded. Hesitantly, I unclasped the chain and handed it to her. It felt like I was handing over the last piece of myself. The elder examined the locket, turning it over and over in her wrinkled hands. It was old and tarnished, with a simple floral pattern etched on the front. She tried to open it, but the clasp was stuck fast. It hadn't been opened in years. "It doesn't open," I said quietly. Tohani stepped forward. "Allow me." He took the locket from the elder and pulled a thin, sharp-pointed tool from a pouch at his belt. He worked at the tiny clasp for a moment, his movements precise and careful. There was a faint click. The locket sprang open. But inside, there was no miniature portrait of my mother. There was no lock of hair. There was only a tiny, tightly folded piece of oilskin, yellowed with age. Tohani carefully unfolded it with the tip of his tool. He held it up to the firelight. It was a map, a hand-drawn map, covered in my father's spidery handwriting. It showed the layout of our old farm, the creek, the stand of cottonwood trees. But in the far corner of the property, a spot I had never seen, was a small, crudely drawn symbol, an X, and next to it, 2 words, agua dulce, sweet water. The elder gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She snatched the map from Tohani's fingers and stared at it, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and horror. She pointed a trembling finger at the X on the map. "This symbol," she whispered, her voice filled with a terrible reverence. "This is the eye of the spirit. It is a sacred place, forbidden. It is the hidden spring that feeds this entire canyon. It is the source of all our water." The entire camp had gone silent. Everyone was watching, listening. The truth crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. Jed Tillman didn't want me. He didn't care about his reputation. He didn't even really care about the farm. He wanted the water. In this dry, unforgiving land, a secret, reliable source of fresh water was more valuable than gold. It was life itself. The mock wedding, the contract, the humiliation. It was all a cruel, elaborate charade to get his hands on me, because he believed I knew the location of the spring. The map proved he was right. My father hadn't just sold his land. He had sold the lifeblood of Tohani's people, and I had just led their enemy right to it. Nolan's face was a storm of fury and vindication. "She is a traitor!" she screamed, pointing a finger at me. "She carried their poison right into our hearts." Tohani stepped in front of me, shielding me from her rage. But his own face was a grim, unreadable mask. He took the map from the elder and studied it. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not pity, betrayal. "I was tracking them," he said, his voice low and heavy, speaking to the whole village now. "I have been tracking the Tillman brothers for 2 moons. They were encroaching on our sacred lands, getting closer to the spring. I did not know how. Now I do." He looked at me, and his gaze felt like a physical weight. I saw the wedding at the trading post. I saw her shame. I saw her run. He had not found me by chance. He had been watching them all along. Finding me was a complication he hadn't planned for, an accident that had now put his entire people at risk. My mind reeled. My father, the man I had mourned, had betrayed a sacred trust. He had condemned these people for a bottle of whiskey. And I was the living embodiment of that betrayal. I was the key to their destruction. Suddenly, a cry from the lookout on the ridge shattered the tense silence. It was sharp, panicked. A moment later, a young scout came scrambling down the path, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with terror. "They are coming!" he cried, his voice choked with dust and fear. "They are coming now! Not one rider, a dozen of them, and they have rifles!" Panic erupted. The tinderbox had just exploded. Marcus hadn't gone for help. He had brought the help with him. He had been waiting just over the ridge. His visit had been a final, arrogant taunt before the attack. The peaceful village instantly became a frantic swarm of activity. Women grabbed their children, pulling them into the relative safety of the rock-walled caves at the back of the canyon. The warriors, hopelessly outnumbered, grabbed their bows and spears, their faces set in grim, determined lines. They knew what was coming. It was a fight they could not win, and it was all my fault. I stood frozen in the center of the chaos, the map to their destruction clutched in my hand. Nolan's accusation echoed in my ears. She is a traitor. It was true. My ignorance didn't matter. I had led death to their doorstep. In that moment of pure despair, something shifted inside me. The broken girl who had collapsed by the creek was gone. The timid woman who flinched at every harsh word was gone. In their place stood someone else. Someone forged in the fire of this new, terrifying reality. I would not let these people die for my father's sins. I looked at the map, my eyes scanning the familiar lines of my old home. And then I saw it. Something I hadn't noticed before. A faint, dotted line leading away from the X marking the spring. It snaked through a cluster of hills labeled the Whispering Rocks. And I remembered. A story my father used to tell me when I was a little girl. A silly, spooky story about the back way into the hills, a series of narrow caves and passages that echoed with the sound of the wind. He called it the Goblin's Path. He said it was a shortcut, but too dangerous to use. It wasn't a goblin's path. It was a flanking route. "Tohani!" I yelled, my voice cutting through the noise. He turned, his face a mask of stone. I ran to him, shoving the map into his hands. "Here, look!" I pointed with a trembling finger. "This path. I know this path. My father called it the Goblin's Path. It's a series of caves. It leads up behind the ridge where they'll be coming from." Tohani's eyes widened as he understood. It wasn't just a map to the spring. It was a map to an ambush, a way to turn their trap into our own. He looked at me, a new light in his eyes. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a sudden, fierce intensity. "You are certain?" "I'm certain," I said, my voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even me. He didn't hesitate. He let out a sharp, commanding cry. The warriors, who had been preparing for a last stand, turned to him. He spoke rapidly in their tongue, pointing to the map, then to the cliffs above. A new energy surged through them. Hope. A fighting chance. "Nolan!" Tohani shouted. Her head snapped up, her face still etched with hatred for me. "Your skills with a bow are needed. You will come." He then looked directly at me. "And you will guide us." Nolan's eyes blazed. "I will not follow a traitor." "You will follow me," Tohani commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And she will be at my side. Her knowledge is our only weapon. We will use it." He turned to a handful of other warriors. "The rest of you, make them think we are preparing to fight here. Draw their fire. Buy us time." It was a desperate, insane plan, but it was the only one we had. We moved like shadows through the back of the village, into the cold, dark mouth of the first cave. The air was damp and smelled of wet stone. Behind me, I could hear Nolan's ragged breathing. She was being forced to trust her life, the lives of her people, to the one person she hated most in the world. We were not just fighting the Tillmans. We were fighting the ghosts of the past. And I didn't know which battle was more dangerous. The caves were a treacherous, winding maze, a series of narrow passages that twisted and turned in the pitch-black darkness. Without my memory of my father's stories, we would have been lost in minutes. I led them on, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We could hear the faint sounds of gunfire echoing from the village below. The diversion had begun. They were buying us time with their lives. "Faster!" Tohani urged, his hand gripping my arm. We scrambled up a steep, rocky incline and emerged onto a narrow ledge, high above the main path. Below us, we could see them. Marcus Tillman and his dozen men, dismounted and moving cautiously toward the village, their rifles at the ready. They were walking straight into the killing ground the other warriors had prepared, but it wouldn't hold them for long. Our position was perfect. We were 50 feet above them, hidden in the shadows of the overhanging rocks. Tohani gave a series of quiet hand signals. The warriors with him, including a reluctant Nolan, knocked arrows to their bows. Their targets were not the men themselves. They were aiming higher. At the base of the steep cliff face above the path were several massive, precariously balanced rock formations. My father used to call them the sleeping giants. Tohani looked at me, giving a single sharp nod. It was time. He let out a loud, piercing cry, a hawk's screech that echoed through the canyon. It was the signal. Below, the first wave of arrows from the village warriors rained down on the Tillman gang, forcing them to take cover right where we wanted them. Then, from our ledge, another volley of arrows flew, but these weren't aimed at flesh and blood. They struck the smaller rocks wedged at the base of the sleeping giants. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low groan shuddered through the canyon. A sound of stone grinding against stone. A cascade of pebbles tumbled down the cliff face. And then, with a deafening roar, the entire mountainside gave way. Tons of rock and earth thundered down onto the path below. The sleeping giants had awoken. The rock slide was immense, a terrifying avalanche of destruction that completely blocked the canyon pass. It didn't just trap them. It buried most of them. Screams were cut short, swallowed by the roar of the avalanche. When the dust began to settle, the path was gone. In its place was a mountain of rubble. The attack was over. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. We had done it. They were safe. But as the dust cleared, my relief turned to ice. One man had made it through. He had been at the front of the party and had scrambled past the initial fall. He now stood on the village side of the rock slide, covered in dust, his face a mask of crazed fury. It was Jed Tillman, and he was staring right at me. He had seen me on the ledge. He knew. Before anyone could react, he let out a guttural roar of pure rage and sprinted, not towards the warriors in the village, but directly towards the hidden entrance to the sacred spring. He wasn't just guessing. He must have seen it on the map before his brother took it. "No!" Tohani shouted. He and I scrambled down the rocks, racing to intercept him. The other warriors were too far away. It was just us, just the three of us. We met him at the narrow, hidden entrance to the spring, a small fissure in the rock face veiled by hanging moss. The air here was cool and humid, and you could hear the gentle trickle of water from within, the lifeblood of the people. Jed was like a cornered animal. His eyes were wild, his face streaked with dirt and blood from a cut on his forehead. "You!" He spat at me, his voice a ragged gasp. "You treacherous witch! This was all mine!" "It was never yours," Tohani said, stepping between us, his knife gleaming in the dim light. "The map is worthless without someone who can read it," Jed screamed, lunging not at Tohani, but at me. He was going to take me hostage. Tohani moved like lightning. He tackled Jed, and the two of them crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. It was a brutal, desperate fight. No skill, just raw fury. Jed was bigger and heavier, fueled by greed and desperation. He landed a solid punch to Tohani's jaw, sending his head snapping back. Tohani grunted, trying to bring his knife to bear, but Jed grabbed his wrist, twisting it with a sickening crack. The knife clattered to the ground. Jed was on top of him now, his hands closing around Tohani's throat. Tohani's face began to turn purple, his legs kicking uselessly. I was frozen in terror. My mind screamed, but my body wouldn't move. This was it. Jed would kill Tohani, then he would take me, and all of this would have been for nothing. The image of Tohani's life being squeezed out of him, the memory of Jed's mocking laughter, the sting of Nolan's hatred, it all coalesced into a single, white-hot point of pure rage inside me. I was not the broken girl in the tattered dress anymore. I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't a stray. I wasn't a traitor. I was Clara of the Fire. My body finally obeyed my mind. I didn't scream, I didn't run. I saw the knife on the ground, but it was too far. Instead, my eyes locked onto a heavy, fist-sized rock next to the cave entrance. The strength I had built hauling water, the power I had found splitting wood, the speed I had discovered racing the children, it all surged through me. I snatched the rock, my hand closing around its rough, solid weight. And with a guttural cry that was torn from the very depths of my soul, I brought it down with all my might on Jed Tillman's arm. There was a wet, crunching sound. Jed screamed, a high-pitched shriek of agony, and his grip on Tahani's throat loosened. He clutched his shattered arm, his face contorted in pain and disbelief. He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock. He had never seen me. Not really. He had only ever seen a thing to be used, a joke to be laughed at. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Tahani gasped for air, rolling away from Jed. At that moment, Nolan and the other warriors arrived, swarming the entrance to the spring. They fell on Jed, subduing him in seconds, tying his hands with practiced efficiency. It was over. For real this time. Nolan looked from the bound and whimpering Jed, to the shattered rock on the ground, to me. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions. The hatred was gone. In its place was something that looked like respect. She walked over to Tahani, helping him to his feet. He was bruised and battered, but alive. He looked at me, his dark eyes full of an emotion I couldn't quite name. It was more than gratitude. It was recognition. He was seeing me, all of me, for the first time. Justice in the canyon was swift and practical. They didn't kill Jed or the few of his men who had survived the rock slide, bruised and broken. To do so would have brought the full wrath of the cavalry down on them. Instead, they took them, along with my father's map and the signed contract, and delivered them to the territorial authorities at the nearest fort. They presented the evidence of their illegal claim jumping, their unprovoked attack, and their attempt to steal a vital water source. Faced with the proof and the testimony of a dozen Apache warriors, the authorities had no choice but to lock the Tillmans away for a very long time. When the warriors returned to the village, there was no wild celebration. There was something better, a deep, quiet sense of peace and relief. The threat was gone. The spring was safe. Their home was secure. That night, the fires burned brightly. The entire village gathered, and the elder woman called me to the center of the circle. Nolan stood beside her. The elder raised her hand for silence. "There are two kinds of strength," she said, her voice ringing out in the clear night air. "The strength of the mountain, which endures, and the strength of the river, which carves a new path. Clara Bishop came to us as a stranger, carrying a heavy burden from her world. But she has shown us the strength of the river. She did not just endure, she changed the course of fate." She turned to me. "You are no longer an outsider. You are no longer a ghost. You have bled for this land, and you have protected its heart." She then took a simple leather cord from her pouch, strung with a single polished turquoise stone, the color of the sacred water. She tied it around my wrist. "We will no longer call you Clara Bishop. From this day forward, you will be known as Inta-Chi, the river's heart." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Then Nolan stepped forward. She looked me directly in the eye, and for the first time her gaze was completely clear of hatred. "I saw only the ghosts of my past in your face," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong. I did not see you." She reached out and placed her hand on my shoulder. "Forgive me, my sister." Tears streamed down my face as I pulled her into a hug. It was a forgiveness I had desperately needed without even knowing it. Later, after the village had settled into a soft murmur of conversations and the gentle rhythm of the drums, Tahani found me. He led me away from the firelight, up the winding path to the ridge where we had first looked down on his home. The stars were a brilliant, shimmering canopy above us. We stood in a comfortable silence for a long time, just looking out at the vast, beautiful wilderness. He didn't take my hand. He didn't confess some hidden love. What was between us was deeper than that. It was a bond forged in fire, tested in battle, and sealed in mutual respect. The elder was right, he said softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. You are like the river. You came here lost, but you found your strength and carved a new path for yourself. For all of us. He turned to me then, his scarred face illuminated by the moonlight. This land, he said, gesturing to the canyon below, is not a thing to be owned. Neither are you. But both are worth defending. My life is sworn to protect this place, this people. He paused, his dark eyes searching mine. Will you stand with me, Intachi? Not behind me or in front of me, but beside me? I didn't need to answer with words. I looked at the man who had offered me water when I had nothing. The man who had seen my strength when all I felt was weakness. The man who had stood beside me, even when he believed I was the embodiment of his people's darkest fears. I reached out and took his hand. His strong fingers wrapped around mine, a silent promise, a shared future. I had come to this place broken, a joke in a tattered dress. But here, under the watchful eyes of the stars, I had finally found my true name. I had found my strength. I had found my home. If this story of courage and redemption moved you, prove you have the heart of a warrior and smash that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring the bell for more tales that prove the strongest spirits are the ones the world tried hardest to break. And let me ask you this. What do you think is more powerful, the strength to endure or the strength to change? Let me know in the comments below.